I'd like to introduce our first speaker for this session, Anthony McClellan. Anthony worked hands-on in the media in senior roles for 25 years. After starting his career at the ABC, he went on to be a foundation member of 60 Minutes, where he spent 13 years in roles from senior producer to chief of production. He has won 3 Logies for his pioneering journalism. Now as the principal of AMC Media, Anthony provides specialist media advisory services to large corporations, high-profile individuals, and others who find themselves caught up in a media firestorm. Anthony will provide secrets of the insider and challenge us to look at what we do every day and how this can be portrayed by the media. What will we need to do differently in order to stay in business and stay connected to the markets and consumers? Anthony McClellan.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. To our Indonesian friends here, apa kabar? Anda memiliki sebuah negara yang indah. And the rest of you can ask what that means. First of all, I want to congratulate Luke Bowen on being able to obviously pick ahead of time which candidate would be our Prime Minister today by pre-recording the opening remarks from that Prime Minister. Otherwise, it might have been entirely embarrassing for the organisation to be playing the wrong Prime Minister. First of all, thanks for inviting me here today to the association. I'm really here as an outsider to try and give you an outsider's perspective on your industry. In fact, I'm really here sort of like a doctor to give you a bit of a media health checkup. And like most medical procedures, this one may be a little invasive, and trust me, it might hurt. But I'm hoping, I suppose, to give you a reality check on how your industry is seen by the media, and through them, how they translate that to your reputation to the rest of Australia. And at the end, I want to give you some ideas, just some simple suggestions that you may want to consider in terms of going forward with how you manage your reputation, because in essence, I'm in the reputation management business. I also want to give an insight, if I can, into how media actually works, because without that groundwork, I don't think you can move forward in trying to repair the damage that's been done. And I suppose the first thing to say is I, to some degree, feel pretty qualified in giving these views. As Tracy mentioned, I spent about 20 years or so in senior media roles, mainly in television, ABC commercial television. I think I came to know pretty quickly what resonated with my audience and what the pressure points for the audience were. And believe me when I say that your industry in particular presents the media industry with a wealth of pressure points for media to exploit. Like it or not, the cattle industry serves up a wealth of exploitative fodder, and excuse the pun, to the media in general and to television in particular. And I want to talk to you a fair bit about television because I suppose in essence that's been my background. So I just need to make some space here. Of course, by way of background to this media exploitation is the simple economic fact that your industry is absolutely crucial, in my view, to our nation and to its economic future. But even more than that, and I think this is one aspect of your message that is failing, quite frankly, I believe you provide an important part of our continuing cultural heritage. That message is not getting out there. Our rural way of life, that message is not getting out there. And us city slickers really have no experience of what that sort of life is. And it's an important part of our overall cultural heritage. I mean, why is that? Why are you men and women and how you earn your living such a target for the media? And probably more importantly, what, if anything, can you do about it? Today I want to try and give you an understanding of the other tribe. That tribe's called the media tribe. And in essence, I'm here as your translator. So come with me into the weird and wonderful world of the Australian media. Once you have an insight, I think, into that other tribe and the mechanics and prejudice of the media, you might be able to repair the damages that we're going to be talking about. I think that's your collective view of the media, am I right? And I think the problem, if you have that collective view of the media, and to rail against it and just how badly off and how badly they treat you and how badly misunderstood you are, that's just absolutely a sort of industry nagging. It's not going to absolutely get you anywhere. You may feel better about having a nag, but the best idea is just to have a Bex, lie down and have another beer, because you won't actually affect any change. Lindsay Tanner, the former Cabinet Minister, had this to say, and he's one of the sharper minds around. He's no longer in the Cabinet. When I checked this morning, I'm not sure if there is anybody left in the Cabinet, quite frankly. But Lindsay Tanner said this about the media. The media is now the most single powerful institution in Western society. And I absolutely agree. I think he's absolutely right. And I believe that the most powerful aspect of the media is, in fact, television, and that's my specialty. As has been mentioned, I spent much of my television career on 60 Minutes, back in the days of black and white television, practically. And as I say, I was learning the pressure points, and we learned on that program what it was that turned audiences on and what turned them off. But I want to start at the beginning in terms of trying to understand why we need to start, and we need to start, I suppose, with the human psyche and how simple emotions are exploited by the media to your disadvantage. And in fact, in my opinion, there's one simple and distressing fact that drives much of the public reaction to the pictures of animals being mistreated, such as the huge public reaction to the Four Corners story, whatever it was, about 18 months ago, showing distressing pictures of animals being mistreated in Indonesian abattoirs. Now, let me be very clear. No thinking person condones such treatment, but they especially don't want to see it. However, there seems to me to be a simple fact that there's something in the human psyche, some emotional connection, whereby most people react strongly and very emotionally to an animal being mistreated. However, show them pictures of thousands of kids starving to death in one of the hellholes of Africa, or untold cruelty in third world zones, then the reaction is much more muted. Why is that? As a generalisation, TV shows don't go to the Sudan to do those stories. It's simple. People won't watch, so they don't go. However, get secret vision of an Indonesian facility, and if they can't get enough of that. They can't have enough outrage. And in fact, the public outrage is visceral, especially if the vision is taped secretly. There's nothing more powerful for that TV program than those words, the pictures they don't want you to see. That's also another pressure point, one of the parts of messaging that television producers hone in on. It's the whole concept of secrecy and bringing you into that world. So there's something very basic at play here. As part of Western society, we seem to value more an animal we kill to eat over that of a starving and dying kid. Go figure. I don't quite understand that. However, that's the reality that you face, and to deny it is self-defeating. But I want to distinguish very clearly, if I may, two separate but often related animal welfare issues. First is the clear cruelty and mistreatment of animals, which I've just been speaking about, for no purpose. But the second is what I'd call process. The process of how we get that great steak on our dinner table. And some of the animal husbandry practices of your industry bring you into conflict, and great conflict, with the animal welfare groups. I'm just learning about all of this. Spaying, hot branding, dehorning, castration, to name some, and you obviously know them. Now, clearly, none of you do these things to be cruel to animal, and if you do, I just can't believe that would be possible, particularly from talking to the people here at this conference. But show pictures of those practices and show those pictures in the cities, and there's an outrage. But tell us we can't have a steak, and there would be a consumer revolt. Unfortunately, we're not very rational, us human beings, and for you, that's a big issue. And unfortunately for you, some of your industry processes, you might argue necessarily, but are visually ugly. That's just part of country life, you say. The simple fact is that the killing of an animal that we eat is visually ugly and confronting. Nobody wants to see what goes on in an abattoir. And those groups opposed to you, who have animal welfare as their core mission, use those emotional messages much, much better than you defend your processes. You are defending your position using necessity and facts. They're using emotion. And in the media war for Australians, for Australian minds, and don't misunderstand me, it is a war, emotion will have the upper hand. Also, your opponents, frankly, are much better organised and have a better understanding of how to exploit the media to their advantage. In fact, it's a marriage, I would say, a marriage made in heaven, the alliance between the animal welfare groups and current affairs and TV news shows. There is in practice what I call a symbiotic relationship. an alliance of mutual need. The animal rights groups need the media to propagate their points of view, otherwise they would just be a voice crying out in the wilderness. For the media, they know through experience that they can get viewer or readership involvement and reaction with those stories. I'll come later to what I think you should do about this situation, but first I want to discuss some of the basic tenets of journalism so you understand a bit more about the tribe and what you're facing. The first tenet that is most misunderstood by both sides, the audience and journalists themselves, is the concept of objective journalists. This is the rather quaint notion that journalists should be objective, and in fact are objective, with most people meaning by this that there's an agreed consensus on the inherent truth of a story, and that like a prophet or a sage, the journalist can somehow come down from the mountain and divine what that truth is and tell you about it. Far from it in my experience. Very rarely is there an absolute truth. My truth can be your lies, and vice versa. We all bring our own set of life experiences and prejudices to the situation, and journalists are no different. Each of them brings their own prejudices and life experiences to everything that they cover in a story. The vast majority of journalists don't set out to lie or mislead their audience, although unfortunately the public are sometimes told lies. Often it's lies by omission, by not telling all the important aspects of a story or points of view of a story, only those that fit the particular media agenda of a story. And many stories actually have an agenda before they start out. There is also an increasing trend to conflate reporting with opinion by journalists. You'll see on the same page a report by a journalist, so suppose in the newspapers more particular, suppose they're reporting the facts, and next to it is an opinion piece telling what they think about it. So this schizophrenic approach to journalism, I think, increases the power of the point that I'm making, that they're bringing their own prejudices and views. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I just think we should all actually just admit it. I believe that media objectivity just does not exist. On both sides, the media and you as consumers, would be better off if we just acknowledge that. What we as media consumers should be demanding is fairness, honesty and balance, and not abusing the power that owning a media organisation brings. We were trained as journalists in what I like to call white hat and black hat journalism. It's the theatre of journalism, the simple narrative that you can sell to your audience, goodies and baddies, just like in the movies. It's the most simple narrative of all. For the bulk of media reporting in this country, not all, the KISS principle is in play. Keep it simple, stupid. Complexity does not have a happy home in journalism. Simplicity rules. There are some exceptions to this, but very few. Why is this? Because many, but not all media bosses believe that their media audience doesn't want and can't cope with complexity. The proof of that is the fact that our tabloid television and newspapers, and we're going to talk about these in a minute, those programs and newspapers have far more consumers by factors of 10 than the more upmarket programs or newspapers. In other words, the consumer, you, are making a choice that you want crap media. I'd like to now take you through the media landscape and what's happening to the media landscape, because we're in a period of substantial change, and it's a new media landscape. We've all heard about the death of journalism and the death of newspapers. My view is that we should not confuse the two. I believe, yes, that newspapers are dying. I don't believe journalism is dying, although it's under increasing economic threat. The most stark evidence of this is that a result of the severe economic pressures on the media companies, they've actually cut back on the number of journalists they employ and dramatically reduced the number that they're recruiting. But in the real world, editors are forced to make journalists do more with less. More stories, less time to do them in depth, and even do them properly. There's more mistakes, more deficit of journalistic experience or mature judgment. Far too often today, a journalist doesn't even leave their air-conditioned office in Sydney or Melbourne to do their stories. They're all done on the phone, so there's no opportunity to build a relationship or really understand some of the complexities of the stories they're covering. Yes, newspapers are dying. We're buying far less of them. Don't try and read this. I couldn't make it any bigger, I'm afraid. Anyone who's interested in any of these figures, please contact me afterwards and I'll be happy to supply them. It's a bit of bedtime reading for you. These are the latest circulation numbers for the major metropolitan newspapers. I just want to highlight a couple of trends. The overall point is, if you own a newspaper, it's a sorry picture. If you're a Fairfax shareholder, it's an even sorrier picture. In the last quarter, SMH is the Sydney Morning Herald, the Fairfax flagship papers, The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald, were down 15% each. That's massive. If you had a 15% drop in your income, you'd certainly know about it. Now, this is circulation. And that's a clear and continuing trend for newspapers if you look back over the past couple of years. News Limited papers did better in an overall declining market. The Australian, their national newspaper, was down 8% compared to the others, so they fell at 50% of the others. I suppose that's some sort of good news. Up here, the local paper, the Northern Territory News, was down 7%. Obviously, well, I noticed yesterday, but obviously not enough. You just can't get up front page croc stories. There's a beauty yesterday, but if they could only have more and more croc stories, they'd arrest their decline. Or either that or get the crocs to read papers. Now, keep in mind, these are circulation figures, the number of papers sold. The media industry argues that 2 to 3 people actually read each paper. I've yet to find the other 2 who read my paper. So they conflate their circulation numbers and multiply them by a factor of about 2.5 to say that's the actual number of people. Australia's largest selling newspaper is the Sunday Telegraph, and they claim it has, in the last circulation period, nearly just over 1.2, nearly 1.3 million readers. That's down 12%. And that's the best-selling newspaper. Their competitor, the Sun Herald, has had only 870,000 readers, down 18%. You know, these are dramatic figures for the media industry. That's a fall of 18%, as I said. That's really bad. Yes, more people are migrating to get their news via the internet, yet those actually paying for it, and that's the key here, is getting people to pay for their news. Clearly, when you buy a newspaper, you're paying for it. When you watch TV, you're sort of paying for it because the advertiser pays for it on commercial TV or through your taxes for the ABC. But in paid digital sales, that is people paying to have the iPad app for the Australian or for the Sydney Morning Herald, in a nation of 22 million people, these are the figures. 60,000 people paid to get the Sydney Morning Herald, 40,000 paid to get the Australian. Now, these numbers are growing, but ever so slowly. And more and more paywalls are being introduced by the media companies. In fact, Fairfax have just announced 2 days ago they're introducing next week paywalls for all their websites. So you won't be able to go on to the website, Sydney Morning Herald website, as opposed to the app, and just download all your news. More accurately, they're adopting what appears to be the New York Times metered approach, which means you'll be able to go on, download maybe 10 or 15, or read 10 or 15 articles and then pay for the rest. Very interestingly, the Herald Sun, which is Victoria's best-selling newspaper, only put up a paywall last year. But they've refused to say how many people are paying for it. In the last circulation figures, they refused to say. There was just a blank. If you go back to that slide, anyone interested, you'll see there's no entry at all. And the reason for that is that the industry rumour is that they had absolutely shocker periods, that basically nobody's paying for it. The Australian Financial Review is a similar story. They've had a shocking paywall experience over the past couple of years, mainly because the amount of money they were charging was horrendous, and they had something like under 10,000 paid subscribers. They're doing a little bit more because they've loosened it up. So that's print. Let's just look at television, particularly television current affairs for a second. Television news. The first numbers I want to show you is news programs on 7, 9 and 10. And the reason I'm showing you these, we've talked before, that the best-selling newspaper gets nearly 1.3 million readers. The newspapers themselves, the daily newspapers, are actually in the hundreds of thousands. However, television, which is what I'm on about, that's the number of people. Combined viewers, about 4 million people. That's rural, that's metropolitan and the country. If we added up just the 5 o'clock and 6 p.m. bulletins, there's obviously more people who watch during the day. Another zone I want you look at is the morning shows. They're very effective for getting your message out there. The morning shows combined have 300 and something each, and it's a ferocious battle. So in total, every morning about 650,000 people are watching the morning shows. We saw 4 million people watching the 6 and 5 o'clock news. We're only still talking about commercials. Another commercial time zone that's important is for the 6:30 shows. I refuse to call them current affairs shows, and to their credit, their producers would probably be embarrassed by that title. Today, Tonight and Current Affair are simply rather mindless entertainment shows. And tragically for us as a nation, both shows have quite a strong following. As one TV veteran once remarked, and I wish I'd said it, never overestimate the intelligence of the audience. And those numbers show that that's true. 2.3 million people every night watch those shows combined. That's 10% of the population. The formula for their shows is well honed. They know their audience well. I feel free to make those comments because for my sins I produced both shows in a past life. And as someone once remarked to me, it was like putting on those shows at night was like revisiting your vomit every night. However, while these are not news shows in the classical sense, they easily drive viewers into an outrage, and an outrage that can build and can be factored in. What about the non-commercial shows, the ABC in particular? The ABC 7 o'clock news around the country has somewhere, excuse me, just under 1 million viewers, which is pretty good. If you compare it individually with the 7 and 9 networks, each of those have around 1 million each. 1.2, 1.3. This obviously varies around the place. Some nights, ABC News gets up to 1.3 million viewers, which is, I think, a pretty good view, pretty good achievement. I want to touch very quickly on satellite TV, Sky News. Sky News has built itself into a news brand, in my view, well beyond the size of its audience. But the actual numbers watching is extremely small. The top rating show on Sky this week was the Paul Murray Show. Paul Murray, for those who don't know, is a Fairfax journalist who has a morning show in Sydney on radio and also does a nighttime show on Sky News. 50,000 people. I mean, there's more people at this conference than watch his show, quite frankly. By the way, Sky's top show on that same night with 150,000, so 3 times, was a show called The Walking Dead. I think that's just maybe an acronym for the up-and-coming media industry. But these are incredibly small numbers by commercial TV standards. However, these Sky News in particular, I believe, have quite a strong influence. I was glued to the set yesterday during the Leadership Challenge, and that's when they come into their own, and that's when the audience does go up. The numbers are still small, but what was happening yesterday was what we call the Beltway influence. It's an American term to indicate the roads around and the suburbs around Washington are called the Beltway, and that's where the intelligentsia and the media guys and girls and women, I should say, live. So it's called the Beltway influence, and that's what Sky has now. Yesterday we saw politicians from both sides, particularly from the Labor Party, rushing to get on Sky to be positioning themselves for that leadership challenge, to be either supporting it or attacking it. My time's running out, so I want to go quickly through. We've talked about the numbers of people watching TV and radio and newspapers. So that's an overview with the numbers. But more importantly, what do consumers actually think of the media? There's no point just saying they sell this number of newspapers, well, how many people watch the TV? Surveys constantly show a fundamental mistrust of commercial media by its consumers. And frankly, that can be an opportunity for you and for your industry. When you come under unfair media attack, if the messenger is not believable, then why would the message be believable? By comparison with the commercials, the ABC is well established as the most trusted brand for news, and that's a mantle that Rupert Murdoch from News Limited would dearly love to have for his outlets. And that also helps explain the feral attitude that News Limited, and I say that word deliberately, the feral attitude for any News Limited journalists here, that News Limited newspapers take to the ABC. They are constantly attacking the ABC. A very good example of that was using News Limited newspapers to basically lobby against the government decision to grant ABC TV the overseas network, Australian television, tender contract last year. As can be seen from these figures, and I'm sorry you can't read that slide, I do my ex-journalism better than I do PowerPoint, I'm afraid. Just under half Australians actually trust what they read in newspapers. Only 48% of people, 1 in 2, believe what they read. I'm not surprised by that number, but I'm very, very saddened by it. Interestingly, slightly more trust local papers. By comparison, nearly 75% of Australians trust the ABC. Let's look at one recent story from Sydney's Daily Telegraph, known as the Daily Terror, to perhaps try and understand why this mistrust might be so. That high-quality paper last week brought you this front-page doozy, the one on the left. This was about the media reform legislation, supposedly, which got dumped, by the way, yesterday. It just ain't happening, folks. Which they ran last week. There are pictures there of the headline, for those who can't read it. These despots believe in controlling the press. Pictures of Stalin, Mao, Castro, Kim Il-jong, Robert Mugabe, Ahmadinejad from Iran, and Conroy, the communications minister, joins them. I mean, it's funny. He's our latest communications despot. But I think this style of journalism is absolutely stupid. And I think this is one of the, and I think people can see that. Yeah, have a giggle about it. But, I mean, it's not journalism. I don't see how that's journalism. Compare it with the same day's front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. Next to it, media reforms not negotiable. Well, you know, that's what Conroy said. Here's a quick quiz. Which is the least trusted newspaper in the country? Any guesses? There's a clue. The drum roll, the Daily Telegraph. So only 48% of people trust what they read as in the Daily Telegraph. Yet they still buy it. They just must love the front page pictures. Quickly, I want to move on. Commercial talkback radio, because that's obviously an area where you can be done over, and that gives your industry a hiding. For all the hype in the cities about the power of commercial talkback radio, only 1 in 3 people trust it. More worryingly for them, another third, so one actually trust it, but another third have no trust in it at all. And these people actually listen. Once again, for the ABC, the numbers are better. 1 in 2 trust it, but still only 1 in 2. That's not great. Social media. I might just leave social media too, because Robbie, who's following me, is going to speak about social media, and I see I'm running out of time and I'm going to be thrown off the stage. So I might come back to social media and happy to touch on that when we get to the Q&A. Let me just say this one thing about social media. There's 2 key things to say about it, I suppose. The first thing is that social media is here, it's here to stay, and you men and women can use it to your advantage. The second thing to say is that social media is totally misunderstood by many people using it, professionals using it, particularly in the media. They think it is a megaphone through which they can shout at their audience. Social media, Twitter and Facebook, are tools for communication and a conversation with your audience, not to shout at the people. The second thing I want to say, and just give you an example, is one of my clients is James Ashby, who is suing Peter Slipper. You might have heard of him, who's suing Peter Slipper for sexual harassment. Now, I've been using social media, in my view, I think pretty effectively in terms of turning around incorrect stories. Not all of them, but I'll just give you one example. In the very early stages when we started that case, a story went out saying that Ashby had been paid money, sold his story to commercial TV to tell his story. 2 points. We weren't even asked whether it was true before the report was published. Secondly, it was totally untrue. I put out on Twitter, because I'd announced about 2 days beforehand I was representing James Ashby. I put out a statement straight away just denying it. I didn't bother putting out a media release. I put it out directly on Twitter. And Twitter has the great power of leverage. And by that I mean, I put that statement out, and one of my followers, and that is people who subscribe to what I put out on Twitter, is Latika Burke, who's the social media reporter for the ABC. She, as of this week, she has 42,000 followers, most of those in the media and what we call the power elite. So there's this is like sort of the the Avon of media. It's pyramid selling, in a sense. You put that out there and that gets rebroadcast. So I put one statement out, she retweets that message, that goes to 42,000 of her followers, they retweet it. So, within minutes it can go literally to hundreds and probably 500,000 people. And that story was able to be killed stone dead within hours. In the olden days that would have taken weeks. In the couple of minutes left before I get thrown off the stage, I want to just move ahead here. Talk to you about some ideas of what you might want to do in terms of going forward with the media. The first thing is to engage. To suggest this may seem redundant, but believe me when I tell you how many clients just want to roll up in a ball in a corner when a media firestorm hits them and don't want to engage in the argument. And the flames are licking at their feet like some Joan of Arc. They just want it all to go away, and it simply doesn't. Well, it's a pretty simple argument. If you're not in the argument, you're not going to win it. Hope won't get you through. You have a choice. Either engage or remain silent and allow your opponents to fill the information vacuum. Let's get off the stage. The second thing is to be clear. The 3 C's. Be clear in your message, be consistent, and be constant. So many organisations enter into public debate and break those rules. They've not spent the time formulating exactly what it is they want to say or having a clear and understandable message. They might even change their message midstream, thereby confusing their audience and their constituency. You've got to keep on repeating. Your message is in fact propaganda. And the secret to propaganda is in fact repeating your message, and repeating your message. The next is to speak with one voice. Communication discipline is absolutely crucial. It can be difficult in the complex world of rural politics and organisations such as yours, but you must all try and be on the same page, or at least on the same chapter. One of the big problems that I believe at the time of the Four Corners story was the confused and confusing reaction from different parts of the industry, and also just how long it took to get your message out there. By that stage, the gap, the media abhors a vacuum. You leave a vacuum and someone else will rush into it. The next thought is be a leader, especially in the area of animal welfare. Establish that as one of your real values, values that can translate to the average Australian. That message is not getting out there. I've heard that message from individuals here at this conference telling me this, but that message is not getting to the average Australian. When there's a public debate that affects your business, you lead from the front, not from the rear. Speak up. Too often industry viewpoint is entirely defensive and is seen as such. If there is distressing vision of animal mistreatment, you be the first ones to comment, not the last. Get out there and condemn it. If there's a plausible explanation for what you're doing, go out and argue it. And as far as possible, be proactive and not reactive. Take a leadership position and be proud of it. I'm getting off, 1 second. Next, be communication guerrillas. By that I mean be nimble and fast in your communications. In this 24/7 news world, there simply isn't time for endless committee meetings. Have clearly approved and enunciated policy positions ready to go to meet the circumstances. War game scenarios that may affect your industry from a communications point of view. Next, empower your leaders to do their job and lead, especially on the communications front. And lastly, educate us city slickers. Educate us about your values, your worth, and your culture. You have a very good story. Go out and tell it. Thank you.